Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this special event of presentation of Italia Helsinki 50, from the final act of Helsinki in 1975 to the OC of today, edited by Ambassador Stefano Baldi and Professor Luciano Monzali. This book marks an important milestone, 50 years of transcontinental collaboration and diplomacy. Today, we are honored to explore the rich history that this book encapsulates. A story of cultural, economic, and social links stretching from Italy to the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe later. Italia Helsinki 50 is much more than a historical account. It's a reflection on visions, dialogues, and the evolution of European cooperation. The authors of this book, a distinguished group of scholars and diplomats, have crafted a vivid narrative on how connections across borders have shaped the last 5 decades. Their work brings to life not only the milestones, but also the human stories behind the scenes, the struggles, achievements, and moments of mutual inspiration that have. As we embark on today's journey, we will hear directly from the authors themselves, who will share their highlights of their work. I am thrilled to share this short presentations round as we celebrate the spirit of partnership that this book so beautifully captures. Now, let's welcome the authors to the stage and dive into the story of Italia Helsinki 50. Our first speaker is Professor Luciano Monzali, full professor of University of Bari, Aldo Moro. Professor Monzali's presentation will be about Italy's policy towards Central Eastern Europe during the detente era. Professor Monzali, please, the floor is yours.
My essay, Italy's Policy Towards Central and Eastern Europe in the Age of the Tent, aims to analyze the attitude of some of the most important Italian diplomats and politicians, Pietro Quaroni, for instance, Luca Pietromarchi, Roberto Ducci, Roberto Gaia, or politicians like Giulio Andreotti, Aldo Moro, in response to the division of the European continent and to the onset of the detente. Which were the motivation that explain a disengagement of Italian diplomacy and politicians about the tent? Let's say there were different reasons, because after all, we have to remember that the Italian political elite was very divided culturally and ideologically. There were, of course, ideological reasons that explain this favor toward the tent. Many Italian politicians had the belief that Europe as a whole was an entity that went from Portugal until Siberia. So they believe strongly that Russia and Eastern Europe were a very important part of the continent, of the European civilization. And they thought that it was necessary to overcome this division that the Cold War had imposed on Europe. There were, for instance, people like Lapira that also believed strongly in the dialogue between the different Christian religions. And this was also a strong motivation, for instance, for Christian Democrat politicians. Also, there was the idea that dialogue with the Soviet Union and with the communist country could help and foster a development of major pluralism inside the communist totalitarian societies. There were also, of course, economic reasons. Italy sought through the tent to find a new market for its own goods and raw materials, energy, oil, gas, that were necessary for the working of the Italian economy. At last, there were political and diplomatic reasons. Italy thought that by developing good relations with Soviet Union and with the communist European countries, could recover some political autonomy at the international level. So there was this idea that alliance with Washington, but also friendship with Moscow, could enhance Italy's role inside the international system. Many Italian diplomats and politicians held the strong conviction that the resumption of cultural, economic, political relations with Soviet Union, with the European communist state, was necessary. It was an important positive element as a preliminary phase for political rapprochement between the two blocs. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Manzale, for your insightful presentation. The next speaker is Professor Imperato from the University of Bari Aldo Moro. His presentation will be about Italy and the genesis of the Helsinki Final Act 65. The floor is yours, please.
Chapter I wrote proposes an analysis of the role played by Italy regarding the Soviet project to hold a conference on the problems of security and cooperation in Europe. The Soviet project, dating back to 1954, found increasing attention within the Italian government and diplomacy, starting from the 1960s. Thanks to the political action of personalities such as Amintore Fanfani, Aldo Moro, and Pietro Nenni. The center-left governments, with the participation of the Socialist Party, so the opening to left, l'apertura a sinistra, so-called, continued between the end of the 1960s and the 1970s with the so-called strategia dell'attenzione, strategy of attention towards the communists, pursued above all by Moro, made the Italian governments of the time more receptive to the requests coming from the Soviet bloc countries. After the Soviet intervention in Czechoslovakia, after the Prague Spring, with its repercussions within the Italian political framework, the East-West contrast takes on a different profile. The model of the Soviet socialism is openly questioned even within the Eastern Bloc, while detente seems to take on a permanent character. On the other hand, during the years between 1968 and 1969 in Italy, the protest known as Autunno Caldo, the Hot Autumn, as well as the student protest with the rejection of the war in Vietnam, were animated by a strong hostility against the United States, which counterbalanced the criticisms made to the USSR. While the campaign against NATO by the left opposition is evanescent in Italy, the renewal of the Atlantic Alliance after the 20-year deadline in 1969 takes place by tacit general consensus, the project of a European conference becomes current, while until then the Soviet or Polish invitation to convene a conference on security and cooperation in Europe, formulated several times, had not been taken into serious consideration by the West. During the talks with Italian Foreign Minister Fanfani in Rome in April 1966, Gromyko, the Soviet Foreign Minister, illustrated the project, finding a favorable response. Fanfani spoke in favor of this project at the Atlantic Council in Brussels on the 7th of June of 1966, considering it an idea deserving of careful consideration. During various contacts developed with other European countries, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, the favorable Italian attitude is absolutely innovative. But the starting point of this political path is to be found in the Atlantic Council held on the occasion of 20th anniversary of the Atlantic Alliance on 10 and 11 April of 1969 in Washington, when Faced with the indifference of other partners, Italian Foreign Minister Nenni hoped for a direct negotiation between East and West. Italy insists that the idea of a European conference would be officially accepted. Some results are obtained in the form of a general willingness to explore these themes, as mentioned by the final communique of the Washington's Atlantic Council. So, an intense diplomatic activity began in which Italian diplomacy was involved, significantly influencing both the Atlantic partners, both the European community. During the Atlantic Council in Bruxelles of 5 December of 1969, for the first time NATO adopts the term conference. The Italian expression that détente has no alternatives gains consensus. In that occasion, Moro introduces the concept of appropriate forums for preparation, stating that the conference must be the culmination of a process of détente. In the Helsinki process, various directions of Italian foreign policy were involved, from the political question of East-West relations to the dimension of security, disarmament, and human rights. Italy had the opportunity to carry out significant action at the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, both on the issues of the free movement of people, ideas, and information, part of the so-called third basket, and on the conception of the question of the inviolability of borders, which has not to be interpreted in a static sense, but intended to consolidate the dynamic character of East-West relations. The Helsinki process consists of three stages. The first, preliminary in Italian language, from November 1972 to June of 1973, the subsequent preparatory phase in Geneva from September 1973 to July 1975, and the conference held in Helsinki from the 30th of July to the 1st of August of 1975, ended with the signature of the Helsinki Final Act, which Moro also signs on behalf of the European community. Thanks a lot for your attention. Ringrazio ovviamente il professor Gerlini, ringrazio i coautori, i curatori del volume che oggi è oggetto di questa short presentation, e mi rammarico per la impossibilità di essere stato tra voi in questa occasione di far conoscere appunto il processo di Helsinki e le sue conseguenze e l'azione dell'OSCE. Buona giornata a tutti.
Okay, goodbye.
Thank you very much, Federico. Grazie. Such an interesting presentation, insightful. Well, now we will move further. The next speaker is Professor Fabio Bettanin from University of Naples L'Orientale. Please, the floor is yours, Professor Bettanin.
Thank you, Professor Mamadayev. Well, I have 5 minutes in an abstract of the abstract. I will start saying that the main thesis of my essay is that the Helsinki process offers a privileged vantage point to grasp Moscow view of a security problem in Europe over the past 70 years. The first step in this direction was taken after the death of Stalin by Molotov in 1954 with a plan for the security in Europe. After 21 years when the final act was signed, many matches had changed in the world and in the Soviet Union. The final act was greeted in Western countries as a new betrayal, similar to that of Yalta. In my opinion, the contrary is true. Leonid Brezhnev's willingness to reach an agreement at any cost weakened the Soviet position in the 3 years of diplomatic negotiation, and the Soviet diplomacy made some big mistake, or if you want a concession. The most important is concern the borders. In the first basket, they are considered unchangeable, inviolable, nerushime по-русски, but not unchangeable. Неприкосновенные по-русски. There is a big difference because you can, because what happened in Germany in 1990 tell why there is a great difference. The borders in Europe changed, and the history had another course. The third basket on human rights was signed by the Soviet delegation, the belief that no one would require the Soviet Union to respect them. More important still was that there was not in the Helsinki conference a basket in security on security problems. The Soviet choice to exclude them from agenda consolidated in the Western Europe the image of the USSR as an important but threatening partner. The story after the final act, you know this story. You know that Gorbachev Perestroika attempted to revive on the world this process of Helsinki in vain for personal mistakes, maybe for objective difficulties. I want to end my intervention coming to our days, because I have spoken over 70 years. The OSCE is still alive, no? Well, a lot has changed since the collapse of the USSR. Since 2000 year, all Russian foreign policy concepts have treated the CSCA and the OSCA, CSCA and OSCE in Italian, as two distinct organizations, not linked by a line of historical continuity. This is important because this choice, in my opinion, important, reflects the ambiguity of Russian foreign policy, swinging between the desire to maintain a role in Europe and the defense of an area of influence in the former Soviet Republic. Because from the second point of view, the OSCE is no more necessary. And in fact, if you read, it is not mentioned by the last foreign policy concept of the Russia of the last year. I must add that in the Western countries, the same damnatio nominis, the name deletion is reserved for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for the Conference of Countries of the Security Treaty Organization, and so on. So I couldn't say that I don't know if the widespread use of expression like collective West, Eurasia, and so on has put an end to the Helsinki process. I hope not, of course. But it seems to me it is important to underline this because it reflects, again, in my opinion, not a clash of a civilization, not or ideologies, democracy versus autocracy, but rather they are an acceptation of the decline of the greater Europe, Russia and the former Soviet Republic included, which is very far from the historical optimism, with all its limitation, inspired by the Helsinki process. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Betanin, for giving us the details of the relations between Moscow and OSCE, today's OSCE. That's really interesting. Now, dear colleagues, we will continue with the next speaker, who is Associate Professor Paolo Soave, Alma Mater Studio in Bologna. Professor Soave, if you keep, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Mamadiev and Professor Gerlini for planning this event, for having me this afternoon. I try to summarize my chapter that focuses on U.S. foreign policy and the CRC process. As already explained in such a clear way by Professor Betanin, for the very first moment, U.S. foreign policy was really critical and reluctant in receiving such an interesting Soviet proposal, basically because it came from Mr. Vyacheslav Molotov. And the most important reason was, of course, that it was clearly aimed at removing the increasing strategic influence led by the USA on Western Europe. That was the same, and it was to some extent an evolution of a previous Stalin's proposal, the famous so-called peace proposal in 1952, just proposing a trade-off, a unification of Germany in exchange of its neutrality. So it was the same purpose. It was only in the late 60s and especially in the early 70s that US foreign policy started focusing on the Soviet proposal because of it matched with the new course of US foreign policy, of course, aimed to detente. So the so-called Great Detente, which finally culminating in the Helsinki process, was really welcoming the Soviet proposal as gave chance to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to practice the so-called linkage. In other words, if the Soviets were interested in getting the US support to their proposal, they had to open two new diplomatic fronts, especially focused on multilateral reduction, balance reduction forces, as well as conference building measures that eventually was included in the final act. So it was a kind of really workable and very profitable bilateral detente. And even if the fact that Kissinger was initially reluctant in encouraging the Soviet proposal, as well as he wanted to leave the floor to his Western European allies, I mean, in the final preliminary step, he was really active and he was really a protagonist. I mean, if we have some strategic points, especially in the strategic basket, it was due to Kissinger's mediation directly with the Soviets. The most important point, the possibility to change peacefully according to international law and by the means of negotiations, the borders of the signatory countries was basically the positive consequence of US-Soviet continuous diplomatic confrontation focused on the CSCE. And even more important, the US intervention, despite the fact that it was late, was able to introduce another, to me, even more relevant factor. In other words, any signatory country will be able to choose freely its alliance. Kissinger wrote in his memoirs that while so deeply engaged in celebrating such diplomatic success that they had waited for so long, the Soviets were not so aware of the fact that it was the end of Brezhnev doctrine. It will be clear in the further developments, of course. And Kissinger's merits are clearly recognized by Hans Dietrich Genscher. In his memoirs, he said that without that intervention, West Germany would have never signed the final act in Helsinki on August the 1st, 1975. Last point, maybe touching the highest point in his presidency, President Ford said in Helsinki, looking at Brezhnev, that the Americans were really intention to take seriously the new commitments, and the Soviets will have to do the same. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Trauer, for your interesting presentation, for the relation between the U.S. and CSCE, how Italy worked closely with the U.S. And how Italy contributed in shaping a balanced East-West dialogue. Thank you very much once again. The next speaker is Giuseppe Spagnuolo, research fellow, Alma Mater Studorium Bologna. Giuseppe, the floor is yours, please. And the topic should be Italian CSC follow-ups from Belgrade to Vienna.
In my article, I dealt with the so-called CSC follow-ups, that is to say, those diplomatic meetings organized by the 35 CSC member states with the primary objective of maintaining the continuity of the Helsinki process and verifying the implementation of its provisions. After having described the impact of the Helsinki Final Act in the international relations, I have analyzed the follow-up meetings held in Belgrade, Madrid and Vienna between 1977 and 1989, as well as a number of other CSC intersessional meetings held during this period. The purpose of this study was to provide an overview of the Italian role within this multilateral forum, with particular consideration of the wider context of the Cold War, which entered its most crucial phase during those years. Regulated at the Helsinki Conference by the Basket 4 of the Final Act, the follow-up meetings were designed by the 35s in order to avoid the full institutionalization of the CSCE. This was largely due to the wishes of Western states, which were concerned about the potential spread of Soviet influence within this organization and the possible weakening of other Western entities, such as the NATO and the European Economic Community. Consequently, the CSC follow-ups were designed to be flexible, and thus it was expected that each new meeting would be negotiated as scheduled on a case-by-case basis. Such a situation could potentially have given rise to certain risk to the continuity of the so-called Helsinki process, in particular if relations between the Cold War's blocs had deteriorated as they did in the late 70s and in the first half of the 80s. From this standpoint, it can be argued that Italy's stance toward the Helsinki follow-ups was characterized by an unwavering commitment to maintaining the multilateral confrontation table, even in the context of significant challenges. This was particularly evident at the Belgrade meeting in 1977, and even more to the Madrid meeting. Here, the negotiation lasted over 3 years, from the 1980 to the 1983, with many interruptions and required considerable resilience. During this period, the international scenario was characterized by the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the Aero missile crisis, and most significantly, the Polish crisis and the subsequent declaration of martial law, which had a profound impact on the Madrid works. In the Madrid meeting, Italy endeavored to prevent a breakup, although it was not spared from severe criticism of the Soviet Union and the Polish military government. During those years of heightened international tension, there were moments when the CSC tables constituted the sole remaining forum for dialogue between East and West. Italy, in collaboration with the other EEC partners, invested significant efforts to safeguard this crucial communication channel. Italy was an ardent supporter of the pan-European dialogue, which undoubtedly also benefited of its own economic and trade interests in the East. Italy's main objective was therefore to keep the dialogue going. In addition, in the CSC follow-ups, Italy supported the balanced deepening of all aspects of the Helsinki Final Act, from the military to the economic and the humanitarian. Italy made a very important contribution to the conception of many of the instruments adopted in those years, such as the so-called confidence and security building measures, contained in the final document of the Stockholm Conference in 1986, and it was also very active in drawing the CSC's attention to the problems of the Mediterranean. Furthermore, Italy also attached great importance to the human rights and individual freedoms, although it was aware that such change could only take place gradually in the Eastern Bloc. When the international situation became more favorable, especially with the arrival of Mikhail Gorbachev in the Kremlin, Italy had no qualms about demanding greater guarantees of freedom and rights in the Eastern countries, as it did at the Vienna meeting between 1986 and 1989. Vienna's concluding document brought about relevant and positive results in terms of advancement in every aspect of the CSE matters, military, economic, humanitarian, with broader hopes for the future developments of this international forum. But as I posited in my paper, the international landscape was on the brink of a significant transformation at the conclusion of the Vienna meeting. Italy was obliged to address the challenges presented by the questioning of established international order. The ultimate implication of these, apart from the collapse of communism and the ascendance of US dominance, remained uncertain for an extended period, as did the CSE's role and purpose in the new era. In conclusion, the Italian political class in the 70s and the 80s tended to regard the CSE as one pillar of its foreign policy, together with the Atlantic and the EEC pillars. The CSE pillar was relevant in order to spread the tent in a divided Europe and to bring East and West closer together, according to the Willy Brandt doctrine of change through rapprochement. From the Italian point of view, the importance of CSE would remain even after the end of the Cold War, if only because the CSE and later the OSCE was the only European organization to include Russia, and Italy has long regarded the maintenance of a pan-European dialogue with Russia as an important factor for peace and stability on this continent. Thank you very much, and goodbye, Siena. Bye.
Goodbye, and thank you very much, Giuseppe, for highlighting Italy's dedication to European unity and peace. We have learned that Italy continued to support CSC's objectives through follow-up meetings, emphasizing human rights and political freedoms. Once again, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Assistant Professor Rosario Milano from University of Bari, Aldo Moro. Have recorded presentation, I guess. The topic of presentation is Italy, Russia, and pan-European cooperation. Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
In this chapter, I have tried to shed new light on the relationship between Italy and the Russian Federation in the field of the security cooperation, between 1993 and 1994. The fourth meeting of the Council of the Conference of Security and Cooperation in Europe, held in Rome from 30 of November to 1st of December, marking the beginning of Italian presidency of the conference. A presidency that took place in a context of proliferation of threats to peace and stability, widespread violence and armed clashes in Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus region and Central Asia, and which therefore involved the Russian Federation. In October 1993, through a memorandum, Russian Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev asked to grant an official status within the framework of the conference to the peacekeeper of Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States. According to Kozyrev, the military operation carried out by Federation in the former Soviet space, the so-called near abroad, had the objective and the effect of putting an end to armed clashes and ensuring a return to stability in an area that was the responsibility of the conference. Moreover, the Helsinki Declaration of 1992 had expressly admitted the possibility of entrusting the CIS with a peacekeeping function in order to support peacekeeping in the conference on security and cooperation in the Europe region. Some of the parts of conference participating countries such as Italy seemed to welcome this idea with a relative favor, with in their eyes offer the advantage of allowing the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe to exercise a certain level of control over Russian policy. Starting in the spring of 1994, Italy insisted more decisively on the theme of Russian rapprochement. On the contrary, the position of Turkey, the Baltic states, Ukraine, Norway, and Czech Republic, in fact, made the idea of compromise with Russia unsustainable. The concern of this country about the hypothesis of legitimizing the role of Russian Federation, led by Turkey, intended to link instead the intervention of Russia to a strict control by the organization regarding both the composition of the armed forces delivered, and as well for the definition of third parties. To understand the Turkish position, however, it's necessary to consider the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, and so the real threat of Turkish that was different from political a prioristic antagonism. On the other hand, in the meantime, the question on NATO expansion emerged forcefully. Until then, the Yeltsin administration had not publicly opposed to concrete hypotheses of expanding the NATO organization. On the contrary, Yeltsin accepted the enlargement of Atlantic Alliance as inevitable, but he hoped that it could take place in a way that would not jeopardize Russian security interests. During the following summit in Hungary, in Budapest, the participating country confirmed the non-decision taken by the Council of Ministers in Rome 1 year before. The result of Budapest summit showed the growing Russian dissatisfaction with the Western, as showed by Yeltsin polemical words towards the Western. that was guilty, in his opinion, to treat Russian interests with extreme ease. And during the same year, the Russian President Yeltsin, protesting against the NATO enlargement plan, starts speaking about the cold peace. The birth of Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 1995 was greeted with mixed sentiments in Russia. On paper, the Security Organization recognized the role of Russia, but did so in the context of a policy that assigned the side function in the field of security and economy institution controlled by Western countries. However, despite the Vienna Organization continued to be seen as not current with Russian interests, even in the years of Putin Russian Federation keep on considering the organization an opportunity for a dialogue, for a collaboration with the Western. The Pan-European organization, this Pan-European organization, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has in fact represented as an important forum for strategic dialogue between Russia and West. In fact, the only security forum in which Russia could participate in a condition of equal dignity. And it has been so through the difficult years of Putin Russia in 2000 years, and it lasts until February 24, 2024, when the dialogue between Russia and the West stopped. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Milano, for underlining Italy's support to continue dialogue with Russia, advocating for cooperation or confrontation in Europe's security matters. Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Matteo Gerlini from University of Siena, and his topic is the end of Cold War and the creation of OSCE. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bye. Thank you for all the distinguished speakers that participate in this afternoon very hybrid session. I will just outline some points of my chapter that is actually more a project plan than an in-deep research, and it is focused, of course, in the big transition in the international system stem from the Soviet collapse, and then the big transformation of the CSE OSCE from the conference to the organization, and not yet completed transformation, if there's any, and also the opening of Europe to the Caspian, Caucasus, and moreover Central Asia, that before was part of the Soviet Union and then became the last frontier of this European organization that arrived up to the doors with China. And the other point in my chapter is related, of course, with the Italian diplomacy and with the role of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gianni De Michelis, in this process, and also his view, his vision regarding the possible creation, never happened, of a CSE for the Mediterranean, but also his approach toward the East that featured deeply the Italian diplomacy in that time, and that it was an option for the development of the CSE and also of the OSCE. still regarding the Charter of Paris and the other following main moments and documents that marked this process. I don't say evolution, but definitely transformation, and a still ongoing process still today, because I would recall the speech of Professor Bettanino regarding the relevance for the current time of this debate, and probably the relevance for the future of the, not only for the of the Ukrainian conflict, but also for the future of Europe of this debate. Thank you so much, and I let the floor to Bebe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Matteo Gerlini, for giving us details of transformation from CSC to OSCE, which formalized the broad commitment to conflict prevention and human rights in Europe. We've learned that Italy supported this transition, which institutionalized principles for stability across political, economic, and environmental spheres. Thank you very much once again. Our next speaker is Professor Egeria Nali, Associate Professor of University of Bari, Aldo Moro. The topic of presentation is the OSCE's contribution to peace in Europe. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Professor Mamadiev. Thank you to Ambassador Baldi and to Professor Monzali for inviting me to contribute to this volume. Thank you to Professor Gerlini to invite me to participate in this conference to present the results of my work. So my chapter is about the contribution of the OSCE to the announcement of international peace all over Europe after the World War II. And for this purpose, I started analyzing the evolution of the OSCE from which was established as a conference and then became an organization, and which is actually today is the largest regional organization all over the world, and it's an inclusive forum for dialogue and security issues, which works on the basis of fundamental principles such as international cooperation and peaceful settlement of disputes, and with a comprehensive approach to security, which includes many areas such as prevention of conflicts, arms control, but also promotion of the rule of law and human rights all over Europe. We can say that it's a kind of key platform for an inclusive dialogue and joint action founded on a vision of a common and cooperative security in a zone of peace and democracy, which goes from Vancouver to Vladivostok. So my paper focuses on the special contribution for promotion of human rights and the rule of law, in particular as they are pillars for a lasting peace in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. And it focuses in particular on the special contribution to stop conflicts or just to avoid conflicts or the escalation of conflicts in Balkan area and Eastern Europe countries after USSR dissolution, after the breakup of ex-Yugoslavia. Then it focuses in particular on the contribution that this organization can play in the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine, notwithstanding this is a very hard period for multilateralism because it is really challenged by transnational threats which are affecting also OSCE as all the other international organizations in this historic moment. But notwithstanding all these odds, all these negative aspects, I think that I conclude that OSCE can play an important role in this conflict, because from the one hand, it immediately condemned Russian aggression because it is in contrast with peremptory norm of international law. It used its Moscow mechanism. It's having an important role for trying to collect evidence to prosecute crimes committed during the conflict, to support work of international criminal tribunals such as the International Criminal Court, which is the main international permanent tribunal devoted to contrast to fight against the impunity of international crime. But from the other hand, it is the only organization at regional level which includes among its members both Russia and Ukraine. Since after the aggression of against Ukraine, the Council of Europe, for example, expelled Russia from its members, and instead it is also a member of OSCE. So I conclude that it has a very important role to play to try to build peace again in Ukraine, to stop the war, and it can play important efforts because it is still a privileged forum for dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nalin, for giving us details of OSCE's contribution to peace in Europe. So we've learned that OSCE became central to peace efforts in Europe, supporting mediation and conflict prevention. We also have learned that Italy actively participated in peace missions, underscoring its commitment to human rights and conflict resolution. So the work enhanced Italy's role in international peacekeeping within the OSCE framework. Thank you once again. The next speaker is Ambassador Paolo Tricillo, Italian ambassador to Croatia. We have recorded presentation.
First of all, I would like to thank very much the University of Siena. First of all, I would like to thank very much the University of Siena, and then two persons in particular, my friend and colleague, Ambassador Stefano Baldi and Professor Monzali. I'm very happy to be part of this project and this publication that is quite important, I think, in giving an insight into the history of CSCE and OSCE. I have been a part of that story for some years at the beginning of my diplomatic career between 1990 and the end of 1993. And it's been, by the way, 4 years during which, as you may know, the Conference for Security and Cooperation in Europe turned into the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So, of course, following the developments of the end of Cold War and Berlin Wall crash, the international community decided to start a new phase of this history of cooperation that started, as you know, with the final act of Helsinki dated 1975. So I have been so lucky to live this particular period of history and of time when the conference turned into an organization, and then its modus operandi changed in a significant way. Then, of course, being a diplomat, I have started different missions elsewhere. But I have always been following the developments in the OSCE, which is not only dear to my heart, but has played also a very important role in European history. My contribution in particular has focused on what might seem as a peripheral aspect of the CSE and then OSCE, that is the fact that it has been joined in its effort first by the so-called non-participating Mediterranean states, that was the official definition, and later by a new category that is now called partners for cooperation. And I have also underlined the, I would say, the merits of the Italian diplomacy and Italian politics in stressing the importance of the CSE also as a model for cooperation, possibly in other areas of the world. Indeed, already from the very beginning of the 70s, when the negotiations started initially in Geneva in 72 for what then would be the 1975 final act of Helsinki, the Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro suggested that a conference on the model of the CSE could also be called for the Mediterranean. And that has led, following, of course, the consultation and consensus that was reached, to a chapter in the final act devoted to the Mediterranean, and also to the definition of the non-participating Mediterranean states, a definition that might not seem so appealing indeed, but that served the purpose of bringing the countries in the southern Mediterranean basin, except Libya for the, of course, the historical situation at the time, to be invited to participate in certain sessions of the CSE, and in turn the CSE would was one of the fora through which cooperation and dialogue was established with the Mediterranean. But the Italian idea was indeed even more ambitious, so ambitious that it never turned into reality. And I think it is so important to consider what is the situation today and how much cooperation model could be established in the Mediterranean basin. And we see that the lack of integration is indeed one of the main points that does not favor a settlement and a peaceful situation in the region. Therefore, I would like to underline that the process that was started by Italy, first by Prime Minister Aldo Moro and later by Foreign Minister De Michelis, that had put forward a number of proposals, in particular with Spain and other countries, Mediterranean countries, still needs to be considered not only as a historical event that indeed has been unsuccessful, we must say, because the CSCM never took place, but should be still today a matter for consideration as one of the possible way out of the situation we are in today. Again, it's very ambitious, but we also have to think sometimes out of the box and consider avenues that we have not been able to pursue so far.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tricillo, for this insightful presentation. So you have pointed out the how OSCE expanded cooperation with Mediterranean and Asian nations with Italy fostering these partnerships to extend security dialogue beyond Europe. And this broader engagement aimed to address transnational issues. And Italy emphasized Mediterranean stability as vital to overall European security. And in your model, could be a good example for others as well. Thank you very much once again. And the next speaker is um, Roberta La Fortezza, research fellow from University of Siena. The topic is the OSCE and the Mediterranean. The floor is yours.
The Helsinki Final Act of 19... The Helsinki Final Act of 1975 The Helsinki Final Act of 1975 expressly recognized the correlation between security in Europe and security in the Mediterranean area. Consequently, the Final Act devoted an entire chapter to the Mediterranean area, entitled Questions Relating to Security and Cooperation in the Mediterranean. Since 1975 to 1990s, the importance of the Mediterranean dimension of the CSE was reaffirmed to each final summit. Following the end of the Cold War, a step further appeared timely. This is why the Italian and Spanish governments presented a proposal for the establishment of a conference on security and cooperation in the Mediterranean at Palma de Mallorca meeting in September 1919. The idea was to establish a new conference modeled after the CSE with a specific purpose of cooperation and security only for the Mediterranean area. However, the project never saw the light of day. In the following years, a different model would be opted for, far from essential element of CSE experience, a model that started in 1994 with the Budapest Summit took the form of the Mediterranean Partnership for Cooperation. In 1990s, relation between the CSE states and the Mediterranean partners became more structured. However, in the same years, there was less strategic attention by OSCE states respect to relation with the Mediterranean area. On the one hand, the same deep changes derived from the collapse of the Soviet Union had imposed the need to redefine the European continental space and the relationship between the states on a new conceptual basis. On the other hand, also new Middle Eastern architecture seems to give space for a certain optimism in the stability, pacification, and security of the Mediterranean region. The importance of this critical and central area has been brought back to the focus by the history. In 2001, the Twin Towers collapse and then the military operation in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, and in 2011, the Arab Springs revolutionary movement. All policy initiatives undertaken between 2011 and 2014 resulted in the Basil Ministerial Council Declaration of 2014, which paved the way for the future stage of OSCE Mediterranean Partnership. More recently, first the COVID pandemic crisis and then the war in Ukraine have imposed new assessment within the OSCE, also with the reference to the Mediterranean Partnership. After more than 2 decades since the establishment of the contact group at the Budapest Summit in 1994, it is undeniable that the OSCE EU-Mediterranean partnership has matured as a platform for dialogue and cooperation. Despite that, significant deficiencies remain. On a theoretical level, these limits can be summarized into three macro categories. Firstly, the persistent peripheralization of the Mediterranean area with respect to the priority interests of many OSCE states. Secondly, the specific circumstance for which the Mediterranean Partnership still continues to resolve itself in a dialogue relationship that fails to materialize, because very often this dialogue remains at the level of enunciation. And lastly, the unequal relationship that exists between the different levels, member countries and partner countries. Today, it will be important to bring Mediterranean issue back to the center of debate and to define a clear vision of the Mediterranean strategy within the OSCE. The current conflict in the Middle East has an ambivalent potential. On the one hand, the conflict could slow down and even block the OSCE partner dialogue. But on the other hand, this same conflict could represent a new opportunity for the organization to decide which path to take for the future. A visionary approach like that of Helsinki in 1975 may be the path that should be followed instead of a new impetus for the partnership. In other words, it would probably be necessary to resume the original Helsinki method, more focused on the vocation for pluralist inclusiveness and construction of bridge for dialogue in respect of mutual interest. This method is based on the implementation of an egalitarian and equal philosophy and on the establishment of a virtuous circle to achieve macro goals in the security field. All this regardless of interference in the political regime of the participant and without predetermined goals. Nowadays, an attempt should be made to apply this method to a Mediterranean region, certainly no less complex and full of challenges than the Europe in 1975.
Thank you very much, Roberta, for uh, for your kind presentation. So we learned that Italy promoted Mediterranean cooperation through the OSCE, aiming to strengthen ties with regional partners and recognizing the security and the dependence between Europe and the Mediterranean, where Italy advocated for addressing challenges like economic disparities and security threats. And this focus is well aligned with Italy's strategic interest in regional stability. Well, I guess we have finished with all presentations. Uh,
Yes, baby, bye. Thank you.
well, then allow me to close this important event, dear colleagues. Uh, First of all, thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope our webinar has given you a glimpse into this book. Well, the story of Italia Helsinki 50 is not only about the past, but also a reminder of the importance of international security and cooperation as we face the challenge of the future. This book speaks to connections we have built, the resilience we have shown, and the shared values that bring us together. It invites us to reflect on how these lessons can guide us in the next 50 years and beyond. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed authors for sharing their journey with us and to all of you for being part of this evening. May Italia Helsinki 50 inspire us to continue building bridges, fostering collaboration, and pushing shared progress across borders. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. This was Bedelbay with you from the OC Academy in Bishkek. Once again, thank you very much. Uh, shall we have a photo, by the way, Matteo? Is it possible to
Sure,
have a screenshot or
sure.
something like this?
I don't want to prolong, but can I say 2 words?
Oh,
Yes,
yes, please,
please,
Ambassador
Stefano.
Baldi. I'm very
No, no,
sorry.
no, no. Just they came to my mind, not about, I just put together the whole thing, so I will not, I have nothing to add to what has been said, but now listening to all this and putting together a kind of consideration that I've received by some people when, when not presenting, but let's say giving or just pointing out that this book was available, especially the online version of the book. In several occasions, I received this suggestion. Why don't you translate it, for the next year? Of course, there's no way to translate a book of 444 pages, in terms of time and funds. I mean, this is out of question. But I was thinking, and maybe my successor. Now I have no title to say anything. I'm dealing with different things now, not OSCE. But of course, there's my successor is very good and is very also active. I think it would be worthwhile considering that what has been said today. I mean, there were many interventions, kind of abstracts, we can call them in English, of what has been put in the written and published in the book. Maybe this could be put together, and for a small, very thin publication, which could be useful, I think, for next year, since Italian, it is an official language of the OSCE, but not everybody, even of the colleagues, of course, can speak Italian or understand Italian. I think we could, use all the knowledge that has been put in the studies here, at least part of it, and spread it a little bit more on the effort that has been done if the English version could be put together. So it's just an idea. We could, I look at Matteo, who is always willing, and we could check this with Andrea Cascone, who is my successor, and the people. Maybe it doesn't work, but it came to my mind that with a little effort, maybe we could have some interesting material for next year. At the end of the day, the 50-year celebration is next year, so we are not late for sure to do something else on top of this great book. And I conclude just thanking all the authors again, because they made such a great contribution to a book which I think will stay for some time as a reference for those who want to know a little bit more about CSCE and OSCE. So thank you again very much for all.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you so much. We share the same wishes, and we try to translate into reality.
May I add something? As Ambassador Baldi mentioned, this book is in Italian. For example, I don't speak Italian, but when Matteo provided this book, I used some internet tools to translate and have summaries like this. And this book is really unique, and all topics are well organized, and it could be a great source of information for scholars, for young generation who would like to know the history of OOC, how it was founded, and besides esteemed colleagues, professors, we can see diplomats among authors. That is a great advantage because diplomats have always been in the field. They know all the details of the processes, and that makes the book more interesting. So I support Ambassador Baldi 100%. If there's a possibility to translate this book into English, that would be really great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody, and goodbye and keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to you all.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye for now.